In the turbulent 19th century, a luminous figure emerged who would forever change the destiny of countless young people. Saint John Bosco, affectionately known as Don Bosco, was not just an ordinary priest. He was a visionary, a revolutionary educator, and a saint whose life was marked by miracles, prophecies, and an immeasurable love for youth. Childhood and youth, the first steps of a saint in formation. On August 16, 1815, in a modest farm in Aibecci, near Turin, Italy, Juan Melchior Bosco was born. From his early days, Juan's life was marked by challenge and adversity, forging the character of the future saint. Tragedy struck the Bosco family early. When Juan was only 2 years old, his father, Francisco, passed away, leaving his mother, Margarita Ochiena, with the overwhelming task of raising 3 children during a time of great scarcity. Margarita, a woman of unwavering faith and practical wisdom, would become the fundamental pillar in Juan's life. "If you want to become a priest to get rich, I will not come to visit you. I was born poor, and I want to die poor," Margarita warned her son when he expressed his desire to become a priest. These words would resonate in Juan throughout his life, shaping his vision of a priesthood dedicated to service rather than personal gain. Juan's childhood was not easy. In addition to poverty, he had to face the hostility of his stepbrother Antonio, who viewed the young man's educational aspirations unfavorably. Despite these obstacles, Juan demonstrated from an early age sharp intelligence and an extraordinary ability to connect with other children. At 9 years old, Juan had his first of many famous prophetic dreams, an experience that would mark the course of his life. In this dream, he saw himself surrounded by children who were blaspheming and fighting. A majestic man said to him, "Not with blows, but with gentleness and charity you must win these friends." This dream would be the seed of his future educational and pastoral mission. The divine call, a dream that would change the world. Juan's 9-year-old dream was not an isolated event in his life. As he grew, these prophetic dreams became more frequent and detailed, guiding his steps toward his divine vocation. One night, Juan dreamed that he was in a field filled with wild animals that transformed into docile lambs. A voice told him, "This is the field of your work. Be humble, strong, and robust. And what you see happening now with these animals, you must do with my children." This dream reinforced Juan's conviction that his mission was to work with the most needy youth, those whom society considered wild and irredeemable. He understood that his task was to transform them through love and education, turning them into useful lambs for society and the church. The divine call also manifested through providential encounters. One day, while preparing to celebrate Mass, Juan met an orphaned boy named Bartolome Garelli. The boy didn't even know how to make the sign of the cross. This encounter was a turning point for Juan, who decided to dedicate his life to educating the most disadvantaged youth. Despite economic difficulties and family obstacles, Juan persevered in his desire to become a priest. He worked tirelessly, alternating his studies with various jobs to fund his education. His determination and unwavering faith allowed him to overcome every challenge that came his way. During these formative years, Juan developed a deep devotion to the Virgin Mary, whom he considered his guide and protector. This Marian devotion would become one of the foundational pillars of his future educational work. Juan Bosco's divine call was not a single spectacular event, but a gradual process of discernment and spiritual growth. Through his dreams, experiences, and encounters, God was shaping his heart and preparing him for the great mission that awaited him. Finally, on June 5, 1841, Juan Bosco was ordained a priest in Turin. This was not the end of his path, but the beginning of an extraordinary adventure that would transform the lives of countless young people and leave an indelible mark on the church and society. Priestly formation, forging the character of a spiritual leader. On June 5, 1841, In the chapel of the Archdiocese of Turin, Juan Bosco, aged 26, knelt before the altar. His hands trembled slightly as the Archbishop anointed them with the sacred chrism. In that solemn moment, he remembered his mother's words, "If you want to become a priest to get rich, I will not come to visit you." Juan smiled inwardly, knowing that the wealth he sought was not material, but spiritual. After his ordination, the young Don Bosco immersed himself in intense training at the Convito Ecclesiastico in Turin. There, under the guidance of Father José Cafasso, a holy priest known as the hanged man set free for his work with the condemned, Juan learned to look beyond appearances and see the potential for goodness in every soul. The streets of Turin became his classroom, and the prisons his mission field. Don Bosco walked through the poorest neighborhoods, where factory smoke darkened the sky and the noise of machines drowned out the dreams of children. In the damp and dark cells, he met young delinquents, some barely children, whose eyes reflected a mix of despair and a longing for redemption. One Sunday in 1841, while preparing to celebrate Mass, Don Bosco heard a commotion in the sacristy. Investigating, he found a frightened young man, Bartolome Garelli, whom the sacristan was scolding for not knowing how to help during Mass. Instead of throwing him out, Don Bosco invited him to stay and promised to teach him. This simple act of kindness was the seed of the oratory of St. Francis de Sales, the beating heart of the future Salesian work. As Don Bosco dedicated himself to his mission, the prophetic dreams continued to guide his steps. One night he saw himself surrounded by fierce wolves that transformed into docile lambs. A voice told him, "This is the field of your work. Be humble, strong, and robust." Don Bosco woke up with the certainty that his mission was to transform the most difficult youth through love and education. The birth of a method, the pedagogy of love and reason. In the dusty streets of Turin, where child laborers wandered aimlessly, Don Bosco began to shape his revolutionary educational method. He observed how teachers of the time used punishment as the main teaching tool, and his heart rebelled against this practice. One afternoon, while walking through a working-class neighborhood, Don Bosco stopped in front of a factory. He saw a group of children coming out, their faces dirty and tired, their spirits crushed by long hours of work. At that moment, he had an epiphany. Education must be an act of love, not fear. Thus was born the preventive system, based on 3 pillars: reason, religion, and love, amorevolezza in Italian. Don Bosco firmly believed that education is a matter of the heart, and that only through genuine love could one earn the trust of young people and guide them toward a better life. In the oratory's courtyard, Don Bosco implemented his method. On Sundays, the place filled with laughter and games. Don Bosco joined the boys, performing acrobatics and magic tricks he had learned in his youth. Between games, he took the opportunity to teach a moral lesson or tell an inspiring story. One day, a visitor watched in surprise how the young people, known for their indiscipline, cheerfully obeyed Don Bosco. "What is your secret?" he asked. Don Bosco smiled and replied, "Love. Make sure that the young people are not only loved, but also realize that they are loved." Don Bosco's pedagogy was not limited to theory. He taught practical trades, preparing young people to earn an honest living. In the oratory's workshops, the sound of tools mixed with prayers and songs, creating a symphony of hope and transformation. The Salesians, a family dedicated to youth. As Don Bosco's work grew, so did the need for assistance. Among the young people who had grown up under his care, Don Bosco found his first collaborators. These boys, who had once been wolves, were now becoming shepherds for a new generation. In 1859, in a small room of the oratory, Don Bosco gathered a group of his closest followers. With an emotional yet firm voice, he proposed forming a society dedicated to the salvation of youth. Thus was born the Society of St. Francis de Sales, the Salesians. The path was not easy. Many in the church viewed Don Bosco's unconventional methods with suspicion. They called him the acrobatic priest and the crazy man of Turin. Some even tried to have him committed to an asylum, convinced that his visions and dreams were signs of madness. But Don Bosco persevered, supported by his unwavering faith and the love of his boys. "I promised God that until my last breath, it would be for my poor youth," he declared in a moment of difficulty. The Salesian family continued to grow. In 1872, in collaboration with Saint Maria Domenica Mazzarello, Don Bosco founded the Daughters of Mary Help of Christians, the female branch of the Salesians. These brave women dedicated themselves to the education of girls, bringing the light of God's love to the darkest corners of society. In 1876, Don Bosco took a step further by founding the Salesian Cooperators, an organization of lay people committed to the Salesian mission in their own lives and communities. "The world will drag us if we do not drag it ourselves," Don Bosco said, inviting everyone to be part of the transformation of society. As Don Bosco's work expanded, so did his prophetic dreams. One night, he had a vision of the global expansion of the Salesians. He saw his sons and daughters working in distant lands, from the frozen steppes of Patagonia to the bustling cities of China. This dream would become reality in the years to come, bringing Don Bosco's hope and love to 5 continents. Expansion and miracles, the hand of God in action. Don Bosco's work grew rapidly, along with his fame as a living saint. His extraordinary spiritual gifts manifested in surprising ways, attracting crowds seeking his counsel and blessings. It is said that Don Bosco performed more than 800 miracles during his lifetime. With astonishing precision, he predicted the future of many people. To some, he announced how many years they would live. To others, he revealed the profession they would have in the future. But perhaps the most impressive was his ability to read souls. Many penitents were surprised when Don Bosco revealed their sins before they confessed them. One day, a poor man approached Don Bosco, attracted by rumors of his miraculous powers. Shyly, he asked him to reveal the winning lottery numbers. Don Bosco smiled tenderly and replied, "The magic numbers for you to win the lottery are these: 10, 7, and 14. Play them in any order and you will succeed." The man, moved, was about to run out to buy his ticket when Don Bosco gently stopped him. "Wait, my friend. Let me explain the true meaning of these numbers. The 10 represents the 10 commandments you must follow. The 7 symbolizes the 7 sacraments you should receive frequently. And the 14 are the 14 works of mercy you must practice, both corporal and spiritual." The saint continued by explaining the works of mercy: feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, clothing the naked, welcoming the pilgrim, visiting the sick and imprisoned, burying the dead. Then he spoke of the spiritual works: teaching those who do not know, giving good advice, correcting those who err, forgiving offenses, consoling the sorrowful, patiently bearing the faults of others, and praying to God for the living and the dead. "If you accomplish these 3 things," concluded Don Bosco, "you will win the best and most extraordinary of all lotteries, the eternal glory of heaven." The man, moved, understood the lesson. Instead of going to the lottery, he went to a shelter to offer alms, thus taking the first step on his path to true spiritual wealth. The pillars of faith: Eucharist and Mary, help of Christians. Don Bosco's devotion to the Virgin Mary and the Eucharist was the beating heart of his spirituality. This devotion manifested extraordinarily in one of his most famous dreams. One night, Don Bosco dreamed that he was in the midst of a fierce naval battle. He saw a large ship representing the church being attacked from all sides by enemy boats. Amidst the storm and attacks, the ship managed to anchor between 2 columns rising from the sea. In the higher column, Don Bosco saw a great host with the inscription "Salus Credentium," salvation of the believers. In the lower column, there was a statue of the Virgin Mary with the title Auxilium Christianorum, help of Christians. This dream reinforced Don Bosco's conviction that the Eucharist and devotion to Mary were the fundamental pillars that would support the Church in times of tribulation. From that moment on, he intensified his efforts to promote devotion to Mary, help of Christians, and Eucharistic adoration among his youth and followers. Devotion to Mary, help of Christians, became a distinctive feature of Salesian spirituality. Don Bosco attributed all his successes and miracles to the intercession of the Virgin. "She has done everything," he often said with humility. The educator of youth, transforming lives with love. In the streets of Turin, where the noise of factories drowned out the dreams of working children, Don Bosco forged a revolutionary educational method. The preventive system, as he called it, was based on three fundamental pillars: reason, religion, and love, amorevolezza in Italian. Education is a matter of the heart, Don Bosco often said, and his method was a living testament to this philosophy. He was not content with merely instructing young people. He sought to form good Christians and honest citizens, a task that required not only knowledge, but also infinite love and patience. One winter day, while walking through the most dangerous neighborhoods of Turin, Don Bosco encountered a group of young delinquents. The boys, with faces hardened by life on the streets, looked at him with suspicion. Instead of judging or shying away, Don Bosco approached with a warm smile. "Would you like to see a magic trick?" he asked, pulling a coin from his pocket. The young people, intrigued, nodded. With dexterity, Don Bosco made the coin disappear and reappear, leaving them speechless. Then, with the same skill he had manipulated the coin, he began weaving fascinating stories that captured the boys' attention. Little by little, these young people whom society had discarded began to trust him. They started frequenting his oratory, attracted not only by the games and stories, but by the genuine love that Don Bosco offered them. Don Bosco's method was not based on punishment, but on prevention. He firmly believed that if young people were provided with a positive and loving environment, they would naturally choose good. In the oratory, the boys not only learned to read and write, but also trades that would allow them to earn an honest living. One afternoon, while watching the young people work in the oratory's workshops, Don Bosco approached a boy named Miguel. The young man, who had once been known for his violent temper, was focused on his carpentry task. "Miguel," Don Bosco said softly, "do you remember the day you arrived here?" The young man looked up, a timid smile forming on his face. "How could I forget, Don Bosco? I arrived ready to steal everything I could, and you, instead of throwing me out, offered me a home and an opportunity." Don Bosco placed his hand on Miguel's shoulder. "And look at what you have become. An honest and hard-working young man. This, Miguel, is what it means to be a good Christian and an honest citizen." Don Bosco's preventive system not only transformed individual lives, but also revolutionized education of his time. In an era when corporal punishment was the norm in schools, Don Bosco demonstrated that love and reason were much more powerful tools for shaping the character of young people. Visions of the afterlife, heaven, hell, and purgatory. Don Bosco's prophetic dreams were an integral part of his mission and spirituality. These dreams, vivid and loaded with symbolism, often provided him with visions of the afterlife that he used to instruct his youth about spiritual realities. One night in 1868, Don Bosco had one of his most impactful dreams. He saw himself transported to a dark and terrifying place, hell. The air was thick with smoke and sulfur, and screams of agony echoed everywhere. But what struck him the most was witnessing a meeting of demons planning the destruction of his work. The demons were heatedly discussing which sins to use to tempt the Salesian youth. One suggested lust, another gluttony, a third sloth. But none seemed satisfied with these options. "Don Bosco's children are strong," growled one of the demons. "They have been well instructed against these sins." Finally, a demon stood up and with a sinister voice proposed, "Pride, it is the sin that brought down the angels. Surely it can bring down these mortal youths." At that moment, Don Bosco woke up, drenched in cold sweat. He immediately understood the meaning of the dream and the importance of cultivating humility among his followers. The next day, he gathered his youth and told them about the dream. "My dear children," he said in a grave voice, "pride is the sin that can bring down even the strongest. We must always be vigilant against it." This dream had a profound impact on Salesian spirituality. Don Bosco intensified his efforts to instill humility in his followers, constantly reminding them that all their talents and achievements were gifts from God. But not all of Don Bosco's dreams were about hell. He also had visions of heaven and purgatory that he used to inspire his youth to lead virtuous lives. In one of these dreams, he saw a beautiful meadow filled with flowers of all colors. In the middle of the meadow, there was a magnificent garden with a resplendent palace. Don Bosco understood that this was the paradise promised to those who lived a life of virtue. "The path to heaven is not easy," Don Bosco explained to his youth after recounting this dream, "but the reward is infinitely greater than any sacrifice we can make in this life." Don Bosco's dreams were not mere fantasies or allegories. To him and those around him, they were divine messages, guides for his mission and for the spiritual life of his youth. Through these dreams, Don Bosco could make spiritual realities tangible, motivating his followers to persevere on the path of virtue. Dear friends, before continuing with the story of Don Bosco, we would like to ask you a question. Don Bosco's prophetic dreams were a crucial part of his life and mission. Would you be interested in watching a video specifically dedicated to these extraordinary dreams? If so, leave a comment saying, "Yes, I want to learn more about Don Bosco's dreams." Your opinions are very important to us. Now, let's continue with the final years of the life of this great saint. The last years, a legacy that endures. As Don Bosco aged, his body began to show the wear of a life devoted wholeheartedly to his mission. However, his spirit burned with the same intensity as in his youth. He continued to work tirelessly for his youth until the last moment, guided by his motto, "Da mihi animas cetra tolle," "Give me souls, take the rest." In the final months of his life, Don Bosco could barely walk. His spiritual children carried him in a wheelchair so he could visit the workshops and greet the young people. Despite physical pain, his face always showed a serene smile, reflecting his inner peace. One afternoon in January 1888, Don Bosco called his superior, Don Miguel Rua, his designated successor. With a weak but emotion-filled voice, he said, "Spread the devotion to Mary, help of Christians and the Eucharist, and you will see miracles." Then he gathered his closest followers and gave them his last advice. "Love the young people, especially the poorest. Love Mary, help of Christians and the Pope. Do not forget that the Virgin Mary is the founder and will be the sustainer of our works." In his final days, Don Bosco received constant visits from his spiritual children, former students, and friends. Everyone wanted a last word, a final blessing from the Saint of Turin. To each one, Don Bosco offered a smile, a word of encouragement, a personalized piece of advice. On January 30th, feeling that his end was near, Don Bosco requested the last sacraments. He spent the night in prayer, surrounded by his closest spiritual children. In the early hours of January 31st, 1888, Don Bosco opened his eyes for the last time. With a faint voice, he spoke his final words, "Tell my young people that I am waiting for them all in paradise." Oredim. With these words, Don Bosco closed his eyes and surrendered his soul to God. He was 72 years old and had dedicated over 50 of them to serving the most needy youth. News of his death spread like wildfire through Turin and beyond. Thousands of people, from the humblest workers to the highest dignitaries, came to pay their respects. The streets of Turin filled with people who wanted to bid a final farewell to the father of the youth. Don Bosco's funeral was an impressive display of love and gratitude. Authorities had to intervene to control the crowd that wanted to touch the casket, take a keepsake, or be close one last time to the one who had been for so many, a father, a teacher, a friend. But Don Bosco's death was not the end of his work. On the contrary, it was the beginning of a new stage. His spiritual children, inspired by his example and guided by his teachings, continued his mission with renewed vigor. The seed that Don Bosco had planted in Turin began to bear fruit all over the world. Don Bosco's legacy endures to this day. His educational method, his love for youth, his trust in divine providence continue to inspire thousands of educators, priests, and laypeople worldwide. The Salesian family he founded continues to grow, bringing hope to the most needy youth on 5 continents. As Don Bosco had predicted in one of his prophetic dreams, his work spread from one end of the world to the other. Today, the Salesians are present in over 130 countries, continuing their founder's mission to form good Christians and honest citizens. Don Bosco's legacy is a living testament that the love, faith, and dedication of a single person can change the world. His life reminds us that we are all called to be signs and bearers of God's love wherever we are, especially for those who need it most. Prayer to Saint John Bosco. O Saint John Bosco, friend of the young and father of the helpless, you who dedicated your life to the salvation of souls, teach us to see the face of Christ in every young person we encounter. Grant us your burning heart of love for God and for our neighbor, your perseverance in difficulties, and your unwavering trust in divine providence. Help us to be, like you, instruments of God's love in the world, patient and loving educators, builders of a more just and fraternal world. May, by following your example, we win the true lottery of heaven, living the commandments, receiving the sacraments, and practicing the works of mercy. Intercede for us before Mary, help of Christians, so that she may guide us on our path to holiness. Saint John Bosco, pray for us and for all the young people of the world, especially for those who need love and hope the most. Amen.